Namu Furoboza. Namu Furoboza. Namu Furoboza.
Welcome to this evening's celebration of the Liturgy of the Day. My name is Ojo Brad with the Dragonfly Sangha. Let us begin by sharing the peace. May all beings awaken to that peace which is our true home. Let us take refuge. I take refuge in the ground of being within which I live and move and breathe. Let us make the accord. I take sanctuary in the heart of being, accepting all of my delusions in thought, word, or deed, born of ignorance, hatred, and greed. Let us give thanks. I give thanks for all beings, awakening to the interbeing of all nature. May my heart be open and my mind clear. May all be free from suffering and the causes of suffering, and may all come to know that peace which is beyond all understanding. Since it is the practice of enlightenment, that practice has no beginning. And since it is enlightenment within the practice, that realization has no end. So I run a podcast sometimes with some friends of mine. And the format of that podcast is that we'll bring a topic, to discuss. The other two won't know what that topic is, and then we just kind of chat about it a little bit. And one time the topic was thought, and kind of how our thoughts come to be, and what we do with them, and things like that. And one of the three people on the podcast, we learned, does not have an inner dialogue. And it kind of shocked the other two, myself included, because we very much have this ongoing inner dialogue or monologue that we have to compete against sometimes. So it was fascinating to hear that there are people who don't have, that sort of running commentary in their minds. And if you are one of those people, this this Dharma talk may not feel quite as applicable. But for the rest of you, and I imagine most of you, kind of have that inner dialogue. I wanted to talk a bit about that, and what that sometimes can be, and how we can work with that at times. Because that inner voice isn't always helpful, right? That inner voice can be kind of confusing and send us conflicting messages. I know my internal dialogue, and that's actually what made me think about this as a subject for this Dharma talk. I was at my kitchen sink doing dishes, and I just, you hear all of these kind of thoughts come to you around, like, oh, like, that other chore you have to do today, you can do that tomorrow. That's fine. Rationalizing that. Or like, things feel pretty good now. I wonder when something's gonna come along that's going to, make it difficult. When things are gonna break bad, right? Or you're snacking on something and it's just like you can eat a little bit more, right? So you have that voice in your head. And over the years, people I feel have come to interpret that voice as the devil, right? It's the devil that's tempting me to be lazy and put that chore off. It's the devil that's tempting me to eat a little bit more or to do that thing or telling me that everything is not going to be okay, right? And we even have that popular image of the devil and the angel on our shoulders, right? Where the angel is saying like, hey, do this good thing. And the devil's saying like, oh no, do the bad thing. Take the bad choice, right? Take that cookie, steal that candy bar, keep the wallet that you found with the money in it, right? And it's tempting to think that way, that there's a devil out there on our shoulder, outside our head, that's driving us to make choices which maybe aren't always wise or skillful or kind, because it allows us to create an enemy that we can fight against, right? Put up our guard and keep that enemy at bay, keep that devil away from us, right? Classic narrative, good versus evil, light versus a dark. And by doing that, though, we split ourselves, right? Because those voices are our voices, but we split ourselves. We want to keep the good parts of ourselves, and we want to avoid or suppress the bad parts of ourselves, put it on our shoulders so we can knock it away, right? And that kind of, othering that we do, it just dumps thoughts into a sort of shadowy space. I want to talk about the shadow a bit. And like I said, we split ourselves into two. Now, the shadow, you may have heard us talk about the shadow before, because the shadow is an aspect of Jungian psychology and his understanding of the psyche. And we use the concept of the shadow because of Jung in one of our mindfulness models, right? The transpersonal model, which, where we have the ego or the psyche represented by concentric circles. Ego on the outside, anima, shadow, and true self at the very inside. And the shadow, classically, is a part of ourselves that we're not willing to accept or integrate, acknowledge, right? Willing or able to accept and acknowledge. And we don't accept certain things, or when we don't accept certain things about ourselves, we bury them, right? We try to get rid of them. We try to knock that devil off of our shoulders. And when those voices come back to us, when we hear that devil voice, we either push them down further or we project them outside of us. And they come through as things that we dislike about other people. So maybe you see someone on social media, an influencer, some kind of a personality just luxuriating in this really expensive hotel or resort somewhere, just every day of the year, just having a good time, and you get upset at them because you're like, look at these lazy people doing nothing, right? But maybe secretly it's because we wish we were them. We're really jealous. We wish we could take that time off because our job is really busy, right? So we push ourselves harder and we call them lazy because we've learned it's bad to be lazy, right? So that comes out of our shadow. We're projecting that on someone else. Or there's that classic trope about the vehemently homophobic person, right? Protesting and yelling about gays and lesbians and things like that. And then later, they're found in a homosexual relationship, right? Because what they're so angry about and projecting onto other people and protesting against, they're actually angry about because they see it in themselves and they don't know what to do with it, right? And so they refuse to acknowledge that, and so it comes out on other people. So we accept things and then we deny other things. We accept the quote-unquote good things and we deny the quote-unquote bad things. And I think it's important to use those air quotes when talking about good and bad things, because the things in the shadow, the things that we don't accept, aren't necessarily bad, right? We evaluate and label things. We label our thoughts based on habits and conditions. how we were raised. And over time, we learn to amplify certain impulses and hide others, the others that maybe are less acceptable. But suppression or denial of those parts of ourselves casts them into the shadow. So they don't go away, they just move. And there's a great example of what this process how this process kind of plays out, that was given by Robert Bly, who's an American poet, who passed away, I think, just last November. But he has kind of an interesting take on the emergence of the shadow in our lives. So he says, when we're kids, when we're young, we have sort of a 360-degree personality. Kids say or do anything, right? Anything that comes to mind, they just say or they do, right? Just and he referred to kids as sort of like a ball of energy and personality. And then one day we start to notice that our parents don't like certain parts of that ball. Why can't you be still? Why can't you be quiet? Right? And so we start to take some of those impulses and we stuff them in a bag. We carry that bag around behind us. And because we want to make our parents happy, we put the parts of us that our parents don't seem to like or that make our parents upset, we put them in the bag. And then teachers will have their say. Good children don't get angry over little things. So we take our anger and we put that in the bag, right? And then we go to school, and in high school we're looking at the people who are our age, and we're sticking in the bag all the things that we're pressured, to not show, right? And Robert called out that he lied constantly in high school to try to be more like the popular basketball players, right? So the shadow, he says, represents all that is instinctive in us. And the part that's left looks respectable, right? So we create this image that we want others to see by suppressing all the things that we feel very instinctively, but we feel we should not let come out. And we stick them in the bag. And that bag is our shadow. And this creates in us a notion of what's okay and what's not okay. And we learn to call the impulse to do the not okay things temptation, right? And in some traditions, the temptation, the tempter, we give a personality. We call the devil, right? In Buddhism, if you're familiar with the story of the Buddha, you'll remember that the Buddha was tempted too. While he was sitting in meditation beneath the Bodhi tree, Mara, who's sort of a devil-like, demonic, destructive feature, or creature, or figure, tempted him, because he didn't want the Buddha to attain enlightenment, right? So, and there's different stories about the way that the Buddha was tempted, but ultimately, the Buddha recognized Mara as himself, as a part of his humanity, as a part of his conditioning. And when he did that, he was able to awaken to the oneness of reality. And when we recognize that voice that's tempting us, right, we feel that temptation, or we feel that impulse to things that are very instinctive that we've hidden away because we don't expect them to be approved by other people. If we recognize that voice as our own voice, we can change our attitude towards it. We don't have to get angry or upset at that voice, but we can meet it with compassion and patience. Give ourselves time, understanding. So the next time we hear that voice, oh, you can do that tomorrow, or why don't you go ahead and do that thing? I can say, well, this is me. What is this telling me? And so I said, there was sort of an inner dialogue that was happening while I was doing the dishes that inspired me to give this talk, because what I realized was, once I recognized, oh, that voice that's telling me like I can do those chores later, just take the afternoon off, just relax, and not that that's a bad thing, right? There's a part of me clearly that was like, you don't need to do this right now. You don't need to take care of those chores. I can get frustrated at that voice and say, it's the devil trying to make me lazy. Or I can say, you know what, that's me. And when I recognized that voice as my own, as opposed to some other thing, suddenly I felt very different about that voice, right? A lessening of tension, a lessening of worry. It's like in the like in that scary story or horror movies where the call is coming from inside the house, right? So I hear that voice. I hear those temptations to, stop doing this, go do this. And instead of needing to look for an intruder in the attic, I can look down at my hand and be like, oh, I'm holding the receiver, right? This is me. This is my own voice. I don't need to go out there looking for some kind of a devil. Get rid of it. I want to eliminate any of those kinds of temptations. I can do the work where I'm at, because that voice is mine. Right? And because the shadow is a part of us, we can learn a lot about ourselves by paying attention. And it's really worth investigating. Because when we suppress those things, when we deny and say, that's not me, right? One, what is it then if it's not you, right? What else is in your head if it's not you? But if you suppress those impulses and those voices, and I'm not saying do everything that comes to mind, right? That's clearly not the lesson either, because there are reasons why we don't do everything that comes into our head, right? But just suppressing them does not make them go away. Suppressing them oftentimes makes them stronger, right? Or they find other ways to be heard. He said, so the person who has not reconciled with the part of them that doesn't want to have to work all the time and just compensates for that by shoving that voice down, now they get angry at people who they see who are taking time to relax, and maybe they overwork themselves, right? So it's not to say that you need to give in to that impulse to be lazy, but don't suppress it, because suppressing is dangerous. Acknowledge it. Accept that it's there. Because once you accept it, now you can do something with it. You can say, okay, where's that coming from? Why am I maybe telling myself this? Maybe I am stressed out and overworked. Maybe my mind is telling me to relax a little bit. And I don't have to do it 100% relaxation or 100% work. Maybe I just need to find a better balance there. Purely suppressing those and saying, like, shut up, go away, they just find another way to be heard. It's just like trying to plug cracks, on a leaking tub doesn't make the water suddenly dry up. It just makes the water look somewhere else, right? Oftentimes with more pressure. And again, acknowledging is, this isn't to say that acknowledging what's in our shadow, things that we've suppressed, especially, where a lot of that suppression happens when we're younger. Now that we're older, boy, there's a lot in there. And it can create a lot of problems for us. And I'm not saying that acknowledging and accepting those things is easy. Absolutely, it's not. And in our transpersonal model, the reason that the shadow is so close to the true self means that it's going to be pretty tricky to do. You're so close, right? That shadow self is right next to the true self. But recognizing that it's there, not shoving it aside and saying, get behind me, devil. That's the first step. That's where the work begins. Because as we are working on ourselves and practicing, nothing can be off limits, including, our devils, right? So don't feel like you need to run from those devils. Reach out your hand, so to speak. Those impulses, they can be scary. They come from our own minds, right? But because they come from our minds, we can change it. We can change what's in here. The things that we acknowledge and the things that we haven't yet acknowledged. We have control over this. Not absolute control sometimes. It's always going to be tricky. That's part of being human. But if it's in our mind, we can change it and we can set it free. And if our minds are free, then we can be set free, which is why we practice. So I hope that was helpful. The moment we receive true and trusting, solid and clear like a diamond, infinite light and life embrace and protect us, liberating us completely. Let us take the 4 immeasurable vows. Sentient beings are numberless. I vow to liberate them. Delusions are endless. I vow to end them. The ways of compassion and wisdom are boundless. I vow to embody them. The way is unattainable. I vow to attain it. Let us take the precepts for the community of the vow. I allow my true self to manifest in all aspects of my life. I take complete responsibility for my own life and all of my actions. I affirm my personal being and acknowledge it as a path to awakening and freedom. I embrace all aspects of my personal being, including my shadow, so that they may be transformed. I affirm an attitude of openness to my true self, even in the midst of suffering. So as always, I'd like to leave some time for us to offer incense and chant, and then spend some time in quiet reflection. So as we chant the Nembutsu, Namu Amida Butsu, I would invite you to offer incense at your home altar or your home centering space. And we'll chant the Nembutsu a few times. And as always, I will knock the Mokugyo 3 times to start, and then 3 times before the last refrain of that chant. After that, I'll ring a bell. We'll spend some time in meditation, and then we'll close. To acknowledge that when we practice with everyone who has studied the Dharma, who is studying the Dharma, and who will study the Dharma and walk this path with us. Let us recite the Bodhisattva's Gatha. We dedicate this practice to the welfare of all beings throughout space and time. May it always be so. So as always, I hope that you found these words helpful, and are encouraged to listen to those voices, and instead of batting them aside, hear what they might be telling you, and what insights they might be inviting you toward. If you want to learn more about our practice, if you'd like to speak with someone, please visit our website at AskSenseiTony.com or DragonflySangha.com. And I hope that you all have a wonderful week. Thank you.